Coming to the gala was my first mistake. I should never have come to the gala. Not that I'd say it out loud, of course. I was there because my colleague, Liz, insisted it would broaden my social horizons, whatever that meant. And so there I was, in a suit I hadn't worn since grad school, clutching a drink I didn't want, shuffling around a room where I knew exactly no one. But when Liz texted, telling me to meet her in the lounge on the second floor, I took the first escape route I could find. I slid into an elevator with a group of sharply dressed people and tried not to look like a lost tourist as I rode up with them. But Liz wasn't there, and now I'm in a room filled with faces I can't recognize. And that's when I saw him. He was sitting alone on a plush, red velvet couch, leaning back with one arm draped casually over the back of the couch. He looked like he owned the place, or maybe the entire building. Dark hair fell across his forehead, and he wore the kind of suit that probably cost more than my rent. I tried not to stare, but his eyes lifted and met mine, stopping me mid-step. He tilted his head just slightly, a smirk on his lips. Something about the way he looked at me, as if he already knew me, as if he were amused by something I'd said, made my heart jolt. "Are you lost?" he asked, his voice low and smooth, as if he were speaking only to me despite the soft murmur of conversations around us. I cleared my throat. "I'm just waiting for someone." He lifted an eyebrow, and in one fluid movement, he patted the seat beside him. Against my better judgment, I crossed the room and sank into the cushion, trying not to breathe too obviously. Up close, he was even more magnetic. The faint saint scent of cologne had me feel breathless. Maybe I should really have listened to Liz more, because why am I acting like a dog in heat from one meeting with a hot man? "So, you're here on business?" he asked. "Just a friend's idea." I winced internally. My answer felt amateurish and out of place, but he didn't seem to mind. In fact, his smile widened, a glint of something playful in his eyes. "Well, I'd say they had good instincts," he said, leaning closer. "Sometimes, a mistake leads to the most interesting things." His hand brushed mine, his touch light but intentional, sending a current up my arm. Before I could process, he leaned in, his lips capturing mine in a kiss that was as unexpected as it was undeniable. It was the kind of kiss you'd expect from a man who did everything boldly, who asked for forgiveness instead of permission. And for some reason I couldn't explain, I kissed him back. I barely had time to process what had just happened when the door burst open and several men stormed in, looking furious. Rhett's hand closed around mine. "Run." Rhett's hand was warm, his grip unbreakable as he pulled me through the back hallways of the gala, past startled waitstaff and heavy doors labelled authorized personnel only. I barely had time to keep up, let alone catch my breath. My heart pounded from the kiss, from the shock of the men who'd burst in, and from the absolute absurdity of what was happening. Who were they? I managed, as Rhett led me down a narrow stairwell, each step echoing in the enclosed space. "Friends of a sort," he said dryly, glancing back at me with a flicker of amusement, as if I were supposed to be in on some kind of private joke. "But I think it's best we skip introductions. Look, I have no idea who you are or what. Rhett, and I'm assuming your name isn't lost in the crowd?" He barely slowed his pace, flashing a grin before he tugged me through an unmarked door that led into a back alley. "It's Elliot," I muttered, even as the name sounded ridiculous under the circumstances. The alley was dim, with only a few flickering lights casting shadows on the brick walls. Rhett didn't stop until we'd slipped around a corner, out of sight of the Gala building, and even then, he didn't let go of my hand. "Elliot." He repeated it like he was trying it on, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Very professorish. He hadn't been wrong. I was the farthest thing from a fugitive or a thrill-seeker. But standing there, chest heaving, feeling his hand still wrapped around mine, I couldn't deny the thrill that pulsed through me. "So, Rhett," I started, trying to sound steadier than I felt. "Are you going to explain what that was back there?" "I'd love to," he said, his expression darkening as he glanced back toward the street. "But right now, those friends aren't going to let us off that easily. We need to move, and fast." He pulled me along again, and I couldn't shake the feeling of walking into something dangerous. But despite every logical part of me screaming to let go, I didn't. Instead, I followed him, my heartbeat wild and erratic as we darted through side streets and deserted paths. We finally stopped in front of an unmarked door in a rundown building where Rhett entered a series of numbers into an old keypad. The door buzzed and he led me inside. "This isn't exactly a hotel," I said, eyeing the peeling paint and sparse furnishings as we entered what looked like a worn-out hideaway, or the kind of place I'd expect to find someone in a suit like yours. "Funny," he replied, a glint of humor in his eyes as he shut the door behind us. "It's amazing the things you learn about people when they're out of their element, isn't it?" His gaze was steady, assessing, and I felt a heat creeping up my neck. Just hours ago, I'd been an anonymous face at a gala, and now I was hiding out with a stranger who'd kissed me and dragged me into a chase that still didn't make sense. Rhett's eyes stayed on me as the door clicked shut behind us. My back was pressed against the peeling wall, still struggling to process the insanity of the last few minutes. And yet, all I could focus on was those beautiful green eyes of his and his full, plump lips. Before I could say anything, he took a step closer, pinning me against the wall. His hand rested against the wall beside my head, and for a split second time froze. Then he leaned in, his lips crashing into mine in a deep, searing kiss that left no room for doubt or hesitation. His other hand found my waist, pulling me against him as if there was no room for air, just that wild, breathless moment. And just as quickly as it started, he pulled back, leaving me stunned and breathless. "Adrenaline," he murmured, his voice low and almost apologetic, though there was a mischievous gleam in his eyes. "It does strange things to a person." I cleared my throat, pulse racing, trying to ignore the blush heating my face. "Right, adrenaline." He chuckled softly, then turned, taking in our surroundings. The safe house was little more than a rundown apartment, sparsely furnished with a threadbare couch, a creaky table, and a few faded chairs. It didn't seem like a place he frequented often, but Rhett moved around with the confidence of someone who'd been in a dozen places just like it. "We'll be safe here for a while," he said, heading toward a small closet and rummaging through what looked like a stash of emergency supplies. "They won't think to look this far out, at least not right away." "Safe here," I repeated, watching him, still trying to wrap my head around all this. "Until when?" "They saw my face, Rhett. You think they'll just let me walk away now?" He paused, glancing over his shoulder with a look that held both sympathy and guilt. "Yeah, they don't tend to forget a face, Elliot. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pull you into this, but you're in it now." I let out a shaky breath, the reality sinking in like a weight. My chances of walking away were disappearing fast, and I couldn't shake the thought that this wasn't just a bad dream. "So, now what?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Do we just keep running until they get bored and leave me alone?" A smirk lifted the corner of his mouth as he tossed me a bottle of water. "Well, lucky for you, they never get bored, but they're more interested in me, so stick with me and you might just make it out of this in one piece." "Right," I said, sarcasm slipping into my tone. "I feel so lucky." I should have been scared out of my mind, probably calling the police or figuring a way out. And yet, here I was, in a strange hideout with him, this magnetic, infuriating stranger who made every instinct scream that running was pointless. "So," he said, his voice softening as he sat back on the couch, "a guy like you, all buttoned up and professorial, what brought you to a place like that gala anyway?" "Against my better judgment," I sighed, looking down at my shoes. "My friend thought it'd be good for me, a chance to expand my horizons." He laughed, a deep, genuine sound that made me glance up, meeting his gaze. Guess she got more than she bargained for. For a moment his expression softened, a crack in the facade, and in that moment I couldn't help but wonder what lay beneath the charm and confidence, if there was a part of him that wanted out of this life. But before I could ask, his gaze shifted to the door, as if reminding himself where we were. "Get some rest, Elliot," he said quietly. "We'll move again soon." The faint sound of rain tapped against the window, muffling the city noise outside. I hadn't moved from my spot, still trying to wrap my mind around what Rhett had told me. The fact that he'd practically stolen my normal life and tossed it into chaos. But then he stood up, stretching out his arms with that confident smirk that was beginning to feel all too familiar. He walked over to the window, glancing out to check for any sign of danger. Looks like it's all quiet for now. I sighed, leaning back against the armrest of the couch. Glad one of us is calm. Rhett chuckled and turned to face me. What's that saying? Adapt or... Die? I finished dryly. Something like that. He grinned, then his gaze settled on me, that warm intensity creeping into his eyes again. You're handling this better than I thought you would, though. What? Did you expect me to just freak out? I rolled my eyes, but inside, I was all too aware of how close he was. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. He took a step closer, his eyes fixed on mine. Actually, yeah, I figured someone like you, someone with an office, a research library, a steady paycheck, wouldn't have lasted this long with someone like me. His hand found the edge of the couch, his fingers trailing down toward mine. There was something unmistakably intentional in the way he moved, the way his gaze stayed on my lips just a second too long. Guess I underestimated you. I opened my mouth to respond, but he leaned in, his voice dropping to a murmur. You know, if it weren't for the fact that we're hiding out from some pretty dangerous people, this whole situation might actually be fun. Before I could reply, his lips met mine, more urgent this time, as if all the adrenaline and the close calls had built up and there was nowhere else to release it. His hand slipped around my neck, pulling me deeper into the kiss, and I felt myself melting, every thought slipping away. Rhett's lips were on mine again, and I found myself giving in, like every time before. How did we keep ending up here? I should be thinking about escape plans, calling for help or something. Anything, besides the way his hand felt tracing a line down my back, or how his mouth managed to make the danger around us seem almost bearable. I wasn't complaining, not really, but a nagging voice in my head kept reminding me that I should be more worried. I should be plotting my escape, demanding answers, figuring out how to get my life back. Instead, I was letting myself be swept up by a man I barely knew, someone I should be questioning, not kissing. But when he pulled back, his dark eyes searching mine with that roguish smirk, I knew I was in too deep. And even if I wanted to turn back, I couldn't. Not after what we'd done, and certainly not after what I'd seen. The door rattled, breaking the moment. A rush of footsteps echoed down the hallway outside, fast and precise. My stomach dropped as I realized we weren't alone. Rhett's smirk vanished, replaced by a flash of focus as he sprang into action, reaching for the small handgun he'd stashed under the couch cushion earlier. "Stay close," he whispered, his voice barely audible. The footsteps grew louder, more frantic. I barely had time to process before the door burst open, splintering against the wall, and 3 men charged in. Rhett fired off a shot, making them duck, but he grabbed my hand without waiting for them to recover. "Run!" he shouted, and we bolted through the back door, sprinting down a narrow, dimly lit corridor that seemed to stretch endlessly. I tried to keep up, my heart pounding in my chest, my mind racing to catch up with the insanity of the past few minutes. We rounded a corner, and I felt Rhett's grip tighten on my hand, yanking me forward just as another shot echoed behind us. He pulled me down an alleyway, ducking behind a row of trash bins, pressing me against the wall. His face was close again, too close, his breath warm on my skin as he whispered, "You okay?" "Define okay," I muttered, trying to catch my breath. But before I could get another word out, his lips crashed into mine once more, fast and hard, almost as if it were a reflex. Like he needed this, needed me, even here, pressed up against a dirty alley wall with danger closing in. When he finally pulled back, he gave me a serious look, his voice dropping to a near growl. "They're not going to stop, Elliot, not until they have what they want." I swallowed, nodding, adrenaline coursing through me. "And what exactly is that?" "A little something I borrowed," he admitted, his gaze shifting as he scanned the alley for an escape route. "Look, I know I didn't give you a choice in this, but right now, I'm all that's keeping you alive. And I don't plan on letting them get either of us." More footsteps pounded toward us, their shadows stretching long and ominous against the alley walls. Rhett grabbed my hand again, pulling me forward as we ran, weaving through narrow alleyways, darting around corners, my heart slamming against my ribs. Somehow, even with danger nipping at our heels, I couldn't stop thinking about him, about his touch, the way he always seemed to be saving me and complicating my life all at once. But I wasn't going to let him go now, no matter how many bullets we had to dodge. We finally reached another safe house, a cramped, dimly lit room with a single flickering light overhead. Rhett had barely locked the door behind us when I rounded on him, the questions that had been simmering inside me reaching a boiling point. "All right, enough," I said, crossing my arms. "You're going to tell me exactly what you got me into." Rhett sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, Elliot." No more games," I interrupted, stepping closer. "You think just because we kissed—" I stumbled over the word, my cheeks heating, "that it excuses dragging me into this life-or-death situation without a clue of what's going on?" He held my gaze, something shifting in his expression. I could see the wariness in his eyes, the hint of regret, like he knew he'd crossed a line with me. "You're right," he said quietly, surprising me with his honesty. "You deserve to know." I watched as he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small flash drive, holding it up between us. "This little thing is what they're after." I blinked, staring at it. "What is it?" "Evidence," he replied. "Documents, names, everything you'd need to take down a very powerful crime syndicate. I stole it to do the right thing, but I underestimated how much they'd be willing to hunt me down for it." My breath caught. "So they want you dead?" "And now you too, since they saw your face," he said, a dark edge to his tone. His eyes softened as he stepped closer, the distance between us shrinking. "I'm sorry, Elliot. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. If I could change things." I swallowed, the weight of it settling in. "You really think an apology is enough?" But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't anger I was feeling. The danger, the thrill, his nearness, everything stirred something deeper, something I couldn't deny. And before I knew it, his hand cupped the side of my face, his thumb brushing along my cheek. "I'd say I owe you more than an apology," he murmured, his lips finding mine in a slow, heated kiss that pushed all thoughts of anger away. For a moment, I let myself melt into him, feeling the intensity and vulnerability behind his touch, as if he were afraid of losing me. Then a loud bang echoed from outside, shattering our moment. Rhett's eyes snapped open and he grabbed my hand. They found us. We barely had time to brace ourselves when the door exploded inward, splinters flying as 3 men charged in, guns drawn. My pulse raced and Rhett pushed me behind him, raising his own weapon. "Stay low," he shouted, firing a shot that sent one of the men stumbling back. But the others kept coming, and soon the room erupted in gunfire, deafening in the small space. I ducked, adrenaline coursing through me as I watched Rhett fight with a deadly precision I hadn't seen before. He moved like he'd done this 1,000 times, each step calculated, each shot purposeful. Then, out of nowhere, one of the men lunged at me. Before I could react, he slammed me against the wall, knocking the wind out of me. My vision blurred as he tightened his grip, a menacing grin on his face. But Rhett was there in a heartbeat, tackling the man and throwing him off me. They grappled on the floor, a brutal struggle of fists and snarled curses. I watched helpless as the man managed to land a hard punch to Rhett's side. Rhett grunted, clutching his ribs, and I felt a surge of panic. "Rhett!" I shouted, my voice hoarse, fear clawing at me. I didn't think, I just acted, grabbing a metal rod from the floor and swinging it with everything I had. It connected with the man's shoulder, sending him stumbling backward. Rhett staggered to his feet, breathing hard. "Thanks, Elliot," he gasped, managing a small, grim smile, despite the blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. But we weren't done yet. The last man was still standing, his gun trained on us. My heart pounded as I saw his finger move toward the trigger, and without thinking, I threw myself in front of Rhett. A shot rang out. Pain flared through my shoulder, sharp and searing. I stumbled back, clutching the wound as Rhett lunged forward, his face contorted with fury. He tackled the gunman, landing blow after blow until the man lay motionless on the floor. Rhett's hands shook as he turned to me, horror in his eyes. "Elliot, God, are you?" "I'll live," I managed, biting back the pain as he pressed a hand to my wound. Full of worry. "Why would you?" "That was reckless," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I could have handled it." I gave a weak smile, feeling lightheaded. "Guess I'm tougher than I look." Rhett's jaw clenched, and before I knew it, he pulled me close, his arms wrapping around me as if he could shield me from the pain. His voice was barely a whisper, but I heard every word. "You're not leaving me, Elliot. Not now. Not ever." We made it out, barely. After I was shot, Rhett finally did the right thing. He gave the drive to the police, and they immediately sprang to action. They arrested the people after him and the organization. The storm had passed, and I sat on the edge of the bed in a cramped motel room, clutching my bandaged shoulder. Rhett stood across from me, his eyes softer than I'd ever seen, a quiet intensity that made the room feel even smaller. "Thank you for everything," I said, breaking the silence. "For keeping me alive and for everything else, too." Rhett let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. "If anything, I owe you my thanks. You saved my life back there, Elliot. You threw yourself in front of a gun for me. Not many people would do that." I shrugged, wincing at the pain. "Guess I'm full of surprises." Before I knew it, he'd crossed the room, standing close enough that I could see the faint bruises along his jaw, the wariness in his eyes. He reached out, his hand gentle as it brushed along my cheek, sending a shiver down my spine. "You're more than that," he murmured, his voice thick with something I couldn't quite place. "You're incredible." He leaned down, his lips brushing mine, hair soft and unhurried. There was no adrenaline this time, no urgency, just the warmth of his kiss, a slow, lingering promise that we were here, safe, together. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against mine. "So what now?" he asked, his tone a mix of hope and uncertainty. I thought about it, a smile pulling at my lips. "Guess that depends on you. Think you can go back to conning people knowing I'm out there? Or maybe you'd rather stick around with someone who keeps saving your life?" He grinned, his eyes glinting with mischief. "I think I'd rather see what life looks like without running for a while. As long as you're up for it." My heart swelled, a rush of warmth spreading through me as he pulled me close, his arms wrapping around me. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt like I could breathe again. Like maybe there was a chance for something real with him. We stayed like that, wrapped up in each other, letting the quiet settle around us. And as I closed my eyes, I couldn't help but wonder, was this the beginning of something, or just another beautiful mistake? Thanks for watching. What do you think? Should Elliot take a chance on Rhett, or is he in for more trouble than he realizes? Subscribe if you love the story. Thank you.